This is an ad. You're hearing this ad on Jake Landau's podcast. Would you like to put an ad in this place? Email ads at jakelandau.ca and talk about ad rates to put your words in my mouth. Thank you. It is Sunday, November 23rd, and it's getting pretty late with Jake Landau. Folks, today we have a new guest for you. He's a pretty well-respectable guy. He's got a lot of knowledge on a different field of interest than what we talk about a lot of time, but something I've always been fairly interested in, and that's pretty important for Canada as a whole. His name is Noah Gairn. He's a defense analyst. He writes the True North Strategic Review, and we're going to be talking today about fun things like fighter jets and drones and military procurement in Canada. And Noah, thank you for coming on the show and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I always love to sit down with people to talk about these things.
No, I appreciate it because I know a bit, but I will fully admit that both myself and my audience have a lot of gaps when it comes to the defense industry and military procurement and equipment. So, and there's been a lot of discussion lately because, for the last decade or so, and I think even a little bit longer, there's been the whole debate over whether Canada should purchase the F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin, the Lightning II as it's called. And that's a fifth generation fighter jet. And what that means, Noah, if I'm correct, is that it has advanced stealth capabilities, right?
That's part of it. So when we talk about the fifth generation, we tend to focus on things like stealth. That's obviously a big part, but it's also about things like being data driven, being AI enabled, stuff like that, having defined software, those kinds of things that go into the platform. Because when you're talking about a fighter jet, you're not just talking about, what can it do? What weapons does it have? That kind of stuff. You're talking about, how does it collect data? How does it transfer data? How does it get data out there in the form of proper battle space? Those kinds of things, especially in the modern context, are very, very important, which is why when we talk about fifth and even sixth generation fighter jets, you'll often hear things like energy be discussed. That's why we have things like sixth generation fighter jets getting so big as they are. Not necessarily because they need to carry more weapons or such, but because they need to have the energy capability to actually process these large amounts of data to be those kinds of motherships to unmanned systems. Another very important thing when it comes to fighter jets these days.
And that's something I was interested in talking about as well. It's like there's the whole modality conflict as where's the role of manned fighter jets, where's the role of unmanned drones, and then a new fighter, not new, but a fighter doctrine that's been coming up recently is the loyal wingman system, where you have a manned fighter jet and then an unmanned drone or maybe multiple drones fighting alongside it, hence the loyal wingman part of the equation. But something I've always been interested in with drones is, like, as you've said, they need a lot of energy, these manned jets, to be able to do a lot of data processing on board. And is that not because there's a significant concern of electronic warfare disrupting unmanned drone systems?
That's part of it. That's certainly part of it. The other thing is that when you look at something like the F-35, it's not just a platform in itself. The F-35 is meant to be a node in a wider data network. So it's transferring large amounts of data, not just to itself, but all of those around it. So other F-35, airborne early warning control aircraft, everything is designed to be data driven, to kind of bring everything into a clear picture. And that's part of domain awareness. That's part of building the picture. You want to make sure that you can accurately, build out what's going on in your airspace. What are people doing? And part of that is that every platform needs to be able to take in all that data from its radars, from other radars, and process it. And again, when we're talking about unmanned systems, that adds an entirely another factor, because now you're talking about manned and unmanned teaming, where, say, an F-35 is controlling multiple loyal wingmen, all of which are collecting their own data, all of which are doing their own separate tasks.
And ultimately, a drone is only as good as the data fed into it, especially because it doesn't have that human element.
Mm-hmm. With drones, especially with loyal wingmans, people tend to think of them as as unmanned fighter jets. But typically, with loyal wingmen, we aren't looking exactly at unmanned fighter jets. Typically, we're again looking at this a companion role. So, for
Yeah,
example, loyal wingmen could be anything from, say, decoy aircraft that are designed to, protect your main manned fighter
by
jet,
drawing
to
away
things
enemy fire.
to things like electronic warfare, to things like, missile trucks, where they're just there as an extra platform. Some of them can get definitely more complex and can get into that more, autonomous role. But for the most part, when we talk about loyal wingmen, we're mostly looking at them as partner aircraft. They're the person on the side who are helping you to do tasks you either normally can't do, or tasks that you need extra support. And again, electronic warfare is a big one. Missile carriers are definitely a big one that you're going to see a lot of with unmanned systems. Um, ISR is another big one you're going to see. So it really depends on the platform. Of course, loyal wingmans come in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them can get, fairly smaller. Well, some of them can get very, very, very big, almost fighter jet sized in their own regards.
One thing I am interested in, because we talk about electronic warfare here, and for those who aren't aware at home, if I'm right, electronic warfare is being able to essentially disrupt things like enemy radar and communications and prevent them from being able to communicate or share data the same way, if I'm correct.
That's a good basic way of explaining it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm right, then does electronic warfare not pose like a ginormous difficulty for drone or unmanned systems? Like even for a loyal wingman setup, would electronic warfare not disrupt the connection between the manned fighter jet and the unmanned drone?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Electronic warfare is always going to be a problem, no matter how much we try and better ourselves and harden ourselves against the electronic warfare, whether that's through anti-jamming technologies or redundancies in communication systems, whether that's, autonomous systems, which of course have the ability to operate even in a electronically contested environment. You're always going to have some concern with electronic warfare, because the way I would say that it's kind of a cat and mouse game of, you're both constantly competing with each other. If you look at Ukraine as a good example, you kind of see that dynamic
I
of
have looked at
everyone's
Ukraine,
kind
and
of
what I've
compete.
noticed is with a lot of like drones there, and not even like aerial drones, but things like quadcopter drones that are like the kind of thing we use as toys here. But like you get what I mean, like those very like smaller things. Like I'll note they're flown not wirelessly, but they literally fly on while connected to a wire so that they can
Yeah.
avoid like the disruption of wireless communications. But how can unmanned like aerial drones that would operate with something like an F-35 as a loyal wingman, like I know you've talked about some like autonomous operating drones, but those seem to have a high risk to them.
Right now, we're at a weird stage of, I like to say we're at a weird stage of autonomy where we can do it, we know how to do it, but we aren't quite at the stage where we've perfected it yet. There's still a lot to go with autonomy and autonomous systems. A lot of that is tied into AI development and having AI centered systems that can process their own data and can kind of make those choices independently.
Because one
But yeah, we're
problem
still,
would be that with disruption of electronic communications, you wouldn't be able to read an IFF tag to tell whether that's your jet or an enemy jet.
it depends on the situations. We do have technology that is hardened against electronic warfare for that kind of stuff. We do, it does exist. So we are at a stage where it's like it's potential, but not like the biggest risk. With electronic warfare, the big thing obviously is that with these unmanned systems, you are hoping that they're going to be somewhat disposable. So if you do lose a couple to electronic warfare, in the grand concept of loyal wingmen, it's supposed to be kind of that. Well, it's okay, it's
So it's more
fine.
of a numbers game.
Basically, whenever you look at wingmen, you accept that they're meant to be cheap, complementary platforms, and of course that comes with obviously having to work to develop those cheap complementary platforms,
So
which
they're not built
here
for
in the West is hard.
survivability as much as a manned jet is. And that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're not meant to be. They're meant to be survivable. You obviously don't want to lose a whole bunch of them,
Yeah,
but
they're
you kind of
expensive,
accept
but
the risk that it's better to lose a couple of them than it is to lose a manned fighter jet.
Yeah,
And there's always going to be risk
and
with
with a manned
electronic
fighter
warfare.
jet, is it fair to say the pilot inside is the most valuable part?
Yes,
Yeah,
100%.
like just because of
You
how
can
much
you can
training goes
replace
into
a
them.
you can replace an airframe. Like you can, of course, there is the concept of producing at scale and how much can we produce in a certain time frame. Sure, whatever, but you can replace an airframe. A good pilot can take a decade plus to replace. Once you lose a pilot, you're not getting that capability back
Right.
anytime soon. So the one goal is always protect the pilot as much as possible. They are the value in the system more than the aircraft itself.
Right. Now, I know Canada flies the CF-18, which is the Canadian variant of the FA-18, the Hornet. I think specifically it compares to the 18CD variant. Like in terms of capabilities, I know America right now, they currently have the FA-18E and F, the Super Hornet, which is a more advanced version compared to what we have.
Also, a different fuselage too. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't realize that, but the Super Hornet is a different fuselage. It's
Yeah, it's
bigger than the
physically
original Hornets and
larger.
all that.
Like,
So you see that a lot in media where they kind of confuse the Super Hornet as just being a really advanced Hornet, but in actuality, it's a
no,
very different aircraft.
I know, like, I think there can be refit programs, but it's pretty extensive from what I'm aware.
We just got through a Hornet, well, not the entire fleet, but a chunk of the fleet got through the second phase of the Hornet extension program. That's supposed to bring them out to the 2030s. Enough time where we can get a replacement aircraft. That's supposed to be the F-35 when we start getting the F-35 in actual, like, decent numbers where we can finally take off the Hornet and be like, okay, we don't need you anymore.
And we'll start talking about what potential next fighters we have in a bit. But something I did want to talk about with the Super Hornet is one of the interesting variants to me is the Growler, the electronic warfare variant, where it's the two-seater. So it's essentially modeled off the F version, which is the dual-seater variant, where you have the pilot and then the supporting officer. And like the Growler as an electronic warfare plane, you have it as two seats, and the second officer is doing electronic warfare operations against enemy fighters and drones. So that seems very useful, obviously. And I guess my question is why doesn't every jet have an electronic warfare officer in a second seat? And why isn't every fighter jet an electronic warfare jet?
Well, every fighter jet could be an electronic warfare jet. That's the fun thing. It really depends on which fighter jet. Like modern fighter jets, especially talking about, whether it's the F-35 or modern variants of the Eurofighter or Gripen, they do have extensive electronic warfare suites that are designed
so
to
it's not a
activate
separate variant anymore for modern jets. It's a more fundamental
for a lot of modern
capacity.
jets, it's no longer a separate variant. Some people do. Obviously, the Americans still run the Growler, and the Australians run the Growler. There is some desire
probably
to have
because they have so many of them still.
Specifically, because you're also talking about things like suppression of enemy air defense, SEAD, and whatnot. So there's a desire to have those separate jets, but for a lot of modern multi-role fighter jets, they do have electronic warfare capabilities kind of baked into them. Things like Vectra, for example, and Raphael. That's an example of a really, really great electronic warfare suite.
I know it's one of the two Chinese fifth generation jets that they're embracing a two-seat doctrine because they're embracing electronic warfare officers as a more standard operating procedure. I forgot whether it's whether it's the J-20 or the J-35, but I know that
J-20. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure somebody will watch this and come yell at me and correct me, but I believe it is the J-20 that has the electronic warfare variant.
I think it is as well, and what's interesting to me is the J-20 and the F-22, which are both fifth generation fighter jets that the Americans and the Chinese have. They're not multi-role fighter jets like Canada is pursuing, like Korea is building a fifth generation multi-role fighter. They're air superiority fighters, and I was wondering if you could clarify the difference in those doctrines and kinds of jets.
So to put it into basic terms for the general audience, when we talk about a multi-role fighter jet, we're talking essentially of a Swiss Army knife.
Like a jack of
It's
all
in
trades.
exactly. This is your fighter jet that's going to be able to do everything from air superiority to, limited electronic warfare to ground attack to want all of that interceptor, because back in the day we did have multiple different fighter jet variants for multiple different tasks. As time evolved, we kind of put everything together into common platforms. Air superiority fighters are specifically designed to combat other fighter jets. It hence the name air superiority. They are meant to secure superiority of the air. I know military planners are wonderfully naming people. They love to think of fun names for things. But yeah, most countries have moved to the multi-role spectrum, both because multi-role fighters have become more capable over time of handling a lot of these secondary tasks, but
They're
also,
good
of course,
enough.
because
And also, with a
it's
pilot, you need to train them on every airframe they operate.
exactly. And that comes back to things like cost and manpower availability. There's obviously air forces that aren't going to be able
So
to
with
run multiple different
countries
types of
like
fighter jets.
America and China, they operate those in addition to multi-role essentially because they can, and it gives them a more robust air force because they have enough resources to do that kind of thing.
Exactly. Every Air Force has a different doctrine on what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it. For example, in the United States, we're still seeing things like F-15s, the newer variants of the F-15s being produced because they serve a role as a cheaper alternative to the
And
F-35
those
while
are being
also being as
exported, I
big.
believe, the F-15EX variants to Qatar, to Saudi Arabia, and also some to Israel, I believe.
I believe so,
Yeah.
yes. I can't speak on the Israel variant off the top of my head, but I believe so, yes.
Yeah. I think technically either the Qatar or Saudi variant was technically a precursor to the F-15EX,
Yeah.
or like essentially it's part of the family because it then got expanded into something and is sold to other countries.
They have their own. The Saudis and the Israelis all have their own variants
Yeah.
of
I mean, the
these
irony,
aircraft.
though, is that both Israel and apparently now the Saudis are also going to be customers of the F-35. Israel already has their F-35 variant, and
Israel has a custom version of the
right,
F-35. They're
and it's
the only.
mainly unique because it has its own computer system, and thus it doesn't appear to have the same kind of difficulties Canada could have with America shutting it down on a few weeks' notice.
They still have the limitations of supply chain, but the Israelis put a lot of their own, like you said, a lot of their own systems and software inside of the
And
F-35.
Israel's manufacturing economy could easily, if you're no longer concerned about intellectual property, then those no longer become serious
If we're no
barriers.
longer concerned about intellectual property, we can
Right.
do whatever the fuck
That's
we
the thing. It's
want.
like when people are like, oh, the Saab Gripen, like it uses an American engine. And I'm like, yeah, but if America
Engines
says they can't make it anymore, they'll just make it themselves.
Engines are funny because a lot of people don't tend to realize that jet engines, especially fighter jet engines, are insanely complicated beasts
Yeah.
that require decades of knowledge and experience to manufacture. We did at one point have that capability. We obviously gave it up when we gave up the Iroquois engines of the Avro Aero. We kind of throw that capability away.
Someday I'll
But
scuba
even
dive in Lake on Ontario and figure out where that thing is resting.
we do have engine manufacturing, Pratt and Whitney Canada, obviously, but they are focused on civilian aircraft and
Right.
whatnot. So we don't really have, but it's a very complex beast. And of course, engines are one of those real big complexities. It's why we do talk about engines a lot, though, especially because they are complex and it's not very easy, for example, to take an engine out of something like the Gripen and put in a new non-American engine.
Right.
It's not that simple
Unless
because, of
you're
course,
like doing what I would think is like if you're no longer concerned about intellectual property, then you're essentially exactly cloning it. You're not trying to engineer your own. You literally just
you would be
disassemble it.
trying to clone it. You
Right.
would be trying to clone it, and that's where the difficulty comes
Trying
in
to.
because jet engines are again a very complex beast.
You
And
can't
we
just take
and a
it
lot of
apart and see, oh, this is how it's put together.
no. There's a lot of advanced manufacturing that goes into fighter jet engines. There's a lot of highly technical engineering that goes into it. Even if you could break it apart and say, this is what every part is, this is what every component is, you still have to figure out how do I manufacture all of these
So,
components to the
would it be
exact
fair to
precision.
say, when it comes to Canada and which jets we procure, would it be fair to say that the Gripen E has similar difficulties to the F-35 in that if America has a problem, they could stop us from flying them in a short period of time?
Yes, you're going to get that with almost every fighter jet, unless you're talking to the French, because the French specifically have built
Well,
out
you say
a
almost
supply
every
chain.
fighter jet. Does that include, like, when it comes to fifth generation, will that include Korea's upcoming one, the
Yes,
KFX? Oh,
yes. There's a lot of American. The Koreans are trying to get a domestic supply chain. So what the Koreans tend to do is the first little bit, they obviously use a lot of foreign components, and then they slowly build out
which is
their
smart. And that's
industry
what
to
China
produce
does too
domestically.
with a lot of their engineering, if I'm familiar.
So for the Koreans, they do have plans eventually to get the KF-21 to a domestic level. It's never going to be fully
And the
domestic.
current
There is
version
always going to
isn't a
be
fifth generation fighter because weapons are stored outside the body, compromising the stealth.
the first KF-21s. I would classify as 4.5 generation. That 4.5 generation.
Is 4.5 generation what arms industry people say when they're upset they can't say fifth generation? They're like, we're almost there. Please buy our products.
It's the fun term we use when we don't want to say, well, it's
last
not
generation.
exactly an F-35 level of fifth generation as we define it,
but it's a PlayStation
like...
4, but there aren't really any new games out yet, so why spend the extra money? No, where do you see fourth generation fighters as still useful when the current situation where multiple countries, both America and China, now field stealth aircraft?
There's obviously the cheaper aspect of, running a secondary cheaper fleet. There's some countries who do like that. Fourth generation fighters are also good in a lot of other scenarios where you wouldn't need a fifth generation fighter jet. Of course, the truth of the matter is that I wouldn't be worried about the fifth generation. I'd be more worried about the sixth generation of aircraft, because
you think we're about to pay into something that's going to be out of date soon?
We're approaching a weird time period where we're very quickly approaching on that sixth generation, and those are going to be a completely different beast of fifth generation. We're talking about aircraft that can process large amounts of data. We're talking very large aircraft. I believe GCAP, which is the Italo-British-Japanese effort for a sixth generation fighter, I believe it's almost getting up to aardvark sizes, very close. The aardvark sizes.
Is the reason that export models of fifth generation aircrafts are becoming available because sixth generation aircraft are about to hit the market, but only for the people building them?
I wouldn't say so, because with the F-35, it's a matter of the F-35 has always been a global initiative from the start.
Unlike the F-22, which is the air superiority fighter, and they keep that to themselves because it's a way to fight F-35s, in essence, if they ever needed to.
The Americans have kept the F-22 to themselves. They want to keep
same with China and the J-20. China has the J-35, which is a fifth generation fighter. It seems fairly capable. I know I wrote a column about this recently, and when I posted it, I think you said, I think you people write these things to make fun of me. But it's a fair, I do think it's a fair question, because
you would write something would write something specifically to mess with me, and I know that.
Well, the question is, like, if we do have concerns about being able to operate the F-35 against America or an American ally, then would we not benefit from a mixed fleet where we also buy China's J-35, and we know whoever we're fighting, at least one of the two will work? Because they're both rival powers. So if we're fighting someone, they're not likely to be backed by both America and China.
I don't trust the Chinese.
But do we trust the Americans?
I don't want to insult any of my Chinese friends, but I don't trust the Chinese as far as I can throw them. No.
From a government perspective, I'm guessing.
From a government perspective and a security perspective, I don't trust the Chinese. Right. China's a very interesting country with how they do things. We could probably dedicate a whole podcast to that. But if we were going to get anything over in the F-35, my immediate desire would be to try and get in a sixth generation program that exists somewhere else.
Would that be soon enough? Because we may, if America keeps talking about 51st state, we may need them sooner than we think.
If the Americans were to come in here with any sort of big intent, fighter jets would be one of the things I would not want to focus on because they are gone within the first day and a
They
half.
don't manage to get off the ground.
They don't get off the ground. And if they do get off the ground, they ain't existed. We could have
That's
an entire
valid.
fifth generation.
To be honest,
Air Force.
I've always said that the way to deter American invasion is you turn the 3 nuclear power plants in Ontario, including the 2 right on the border, into doomsday devices. Because, I mean, you think about it. It's,
with me.
because like there's a bunch of fissile material already there, and like they're designed to fail safe, but what if we send people there to make them not fail safe? Like, you get what I mean? It's like, I think that would be our best bet, because we, like, in an American invasion, we could just completely irradiate New York City for 100 years, and then no one wins.
No one wins. We're gonna do the ultimate petty act and radiate.
Yeah, so but am I wrong that might be more useful in an invasion context?
It's like if you're concerned with fighter jets is defending against the Americans, I don't want to be the one to like tell people like sorry to tell you, but they're getting deleted within like a day and a half. There's nothing that can be happening. There's nothing that they are doing. There is absolutely zero that they will ever be able to do against any sort of American. They're gone.
So what you're saying is we need nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons is a very interesting topic.
That's not a no.
That's not. The thing with nuclear is that as soon as you make your intent clear that you would want nuclear in a hypothetical sense, you suddenly draw the ire and the eye of everybody, which can have a cascading effect that might not have existed if you never pursued them at all.
Yeah, then so you might be Israel and still getting sold F-35s by America anyways.
We don't get to be Israel and make nukes and give them to the South Africans and have a jolly old time.
Starting a nuclear weapons program in 3 different countries in the 80s at the same time.
We can blame the French for that. We can blame the French for
folks, if you ever want to wonder, hey, how did Israel get nuclear weapons? Literally, the French did it.
The French are the problem of everything.
The French gave them the trigger mechanism. It's entirely the French fault.
The French also helped build up China's domestic defense industry pretty heavily in the 80s and 90s. So, like, thanks, France.
That I don't mind as much. Like, I think it's good for China to be there to fight America, and then we can just sit back with popcorn and watch.
So like, yeah, so when it comes to any jet, my policy has always been, if you don't want the F-35, get the F-35 that you need for now and wait for a 6th generation, because 6th generation aircraft are going to be an entirely different beast to the 5th generation, even the 4th generation. I'm not keen on jumping on any 4th generation aircraft, especially 4th generation aircraft.
Yeah,
we're none of the benefits.
There is a reason Sweden is so desperate for us to buy the Gripen E, and it's because not many other people are going to.
No, the Griffins had to compete with a very, very tight, very, very competitive market for fighter jets.
Well, especially because now that China is officially putting the J-35 on the export market, like Pakistan has a deal. I know Egypt was considering things. Like, there are going to be other countries flying 5th generation jets that America does not control.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you buy a Gripen?
Not that, but also you look at, even Russia and Algeria now have a, export deal. You're going to see a proliferation of 5th generation aircraft, and of course, I'm not one to praise Russian 5th generation aircraft.
No, and also because they don't seem to even be flying that many in Ukraine, which is where you would be flying them right now if you had them to fly.
They're still out there, so it's like you still.
Oh yeah, it's like they're not vaporware; they exist. Like, but it's like if you're in that block of the world, you seem much more likely to buy the J-35 than you are to buy the Russian aircraft.
I would say yes at this stage. The big thing is that there's a lot of competition coming onto the market. Like, traditionally, for like a country like Russia, if you think about their traditional export partners and
Well,
who
yeah,
they were
Turkey
exporting
is
to.
making a fifth generation jet, but that's interesting.
Unbelievable. Like,
Aren't they making an air superiority fighter rather than a multi-role fighter?
I believe Khan is
Yeah.
a multi-role. I'd have to look it up because I swear Khan is a multi-role.
From when I
I'll
looked
believe
at it,
Khan's
I
existence
let me look
when
at
I
it.
see it.
Let me look at it now. But I swear that the Khan is a fifth
Like,
generation fighter. Well, it's fifth generation. No, I think it's an air superiority fighter, at least according to Wikipedia's citations.
I give credit to Turkey for wanting to really be domestic. Like from the start, Khan is meant to be a very domestic aircraft.
Oh yeah,
It's
and I
meant to
mean
be very Turkish.
when you're considering that they aren't having very friendly relations with Israel, and that Israel has the F-35, a fifth generation air superiority fighter seems like a very wise investment.
Hmm. Turkey's also built out a really great arms industry. One that we don't really talk about in NATO too much. Turkey is the weird kind of like outcast child of NATO where we don't really talk about them, despite the fact that they are a NATO partner.
Right.
They are a NATO nation. They kind of just exist doing their own thing about 80% of the time, doing whatever side quest they feel like doing on that particular day. But Turkey has managed to build out a really great domestic arms industry, one that they've been working meticulously on for the last several decades, which has given them the opportunity to do things like take Con and be like, we want to try and build a domestic supply chain, comparatively to, again, the Korean approach of, well, we're going to import a lot of the avionics and a lot of the technologies first, and then we're going to slowly increase the
Like a
indigenous,
ship of Theseus, slowly replace the parts until
slowly
eventually
replace the
it's an
domestic.
indigenous aircraft. For clarification to folks at home, indigenous military equipment does not mean made by indigenous people. It means that it's made in that country, and thus the
The supply chain is built in that country,
Right.
and it's using parts from that country's supply
Which
chain.
has
Because,
obvious national security benefits, especially during
like, we're looking at
wartime
an
when
aircraft like
supply chains are
Gripen.
disrupted.
If we're looking at an aircraft like Gripen, when you hear stuff like Saab come and say, "Well, we're going to manufacture Gripen in Canada," what they actually mean is more closer to assembly and
Yeah.
fuselage production. Because if you look at something like the Gripen, most of its components are not Swedish. The
So there would be
radar is
very little, if
Italian.
any, intellectual property sharing that would actually
Mhm.
allow Canada to develop our own domestic aviation.
Exactly. It gets weird because of course there are some things that are Swedish. Again, the electronic warfare system
Right.
is Swedish.
Which is an important
But
part.
when it comes to the radar, that's Italian. When it comes to the heads-up display and all that, that is Israeli. The ejection seats are from Martin Baker, like everybody else in existence. The engine is obviously a GE engine. It's American. So when you hear stuff like, "Well, we're going to manufacture this here," it gets a bit more complicated because it's not so much when people hear that they think, "Okay, we're going to manufacture everything here. We're going to have this big supply chain." And it's like you could have that if that supplier agrees that
Right.
it's worth the effort to set up there. But you're dealing with now a bunch of different companies with a bunch of different supply chains. Again, for the Gripen, it's especially on it's not really Swedish in a lot of aspects. Even the radar, which was Swedish with the C and D variant, is now Italian. They went with a Leonardo radar for it. So if you're a Saab, you could easily go to these manufacturers and be like, "Hey, well, we want to try and work something out where it can be manufactured here." But of course, you're dealing with a bunch of other companies, and it gets really complex. And then there's, of course, intellectual property law and blah 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 blah. It gets very complex when you're talking about domestic fighter jet production. It's something that I always caution people about because you don't want people to get this like narrative of everything's going to be manufactured in Canada.
No.
It's not. A lot of the components will be shipped in
It's
Canada.
picking your poison, picking who you think you'll be able to rely on without being punished.
And that's not me trying to like insult Gripen or anything or say like, "Oh no, blah blah blah." It's pointing out that fighter jets are insanely complex machinery.
Yeah.
They are insanely difficult to manufacture from any country on their own. Again, if you really want to talk about domestic supply chain with fighter jets, you're looking at France, who again spent literal decades building out the supply chain themselves. They took the extra effort to make as much of it as an indigenous production as possible.
But is Europe
But of
anywhere
course-
near a fifth generation fighter on their own?
It gets
And Russia
yeah.
doesn't count.
So Russia, no, we don't count. We don't count Russia for fifth generation. No, no. With GCAP, I call it GCAP still because I like the name. With that, that's a British Italo Japanese effort. They want to have the first example flying in 2035. That's mostly because of the Japanese timeline. The Japanese need that aircraft in service by that point. If we look at, the Franco-German efforts for a sixth generation, that's currently on
So
fire.
some aren't
It's
doing a fifth generation because they're just trying to leap beyond it.
We're leaping beyond fifth and going right to sixth.
Yeah.
It's a leap
Like
case.
if you're going to invest, if you're going to invest
like
in building your own thing, skate where the puck is going, not where it already is.
Exactly. And of course, we are seeing countries like the UK and Germany, of course, a bunch of European countries acquire F-35s in that time. You're going to see a future where F-35s and fifth generations are operating along sixth generation aircraft. The sixth generation aircraft, again, are a completely different beast to fifth generation aircraft. They are going to be much larger. They're going to be, a lot more data centric, a lot more AI centric. They're going to have a lot more energy and power in them. They're going to be more long range.
I guess my question then about sixth generation fighters is, will they actually be more lethal though? Will they be able to pierce the stealth of fifth generation fighters significantly? Because if they can't, will they? Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to unequivocally say that sixth generation will be more capable than fifth generation. A lot of that comes again from the power dynamic. It's kind of it's the age-old science of the more power, for example, you can pump into a radar, the more obviously capable it will be. But similarly, these are aircraft that are going to be built with the size and capabilities to, again, get into that processing large amounts of data, into that actual dedicated, they're built from the ground up for manned, unmanned
I guess
teaming.
what I just wonder is, is going too big making yourself too visible of a target?
It depends on the aircraft itself. Of course, when we're talking about stealth, we're talking about things like radar cross section. Right. So it depends on the aircraft itself, what materials it's using, its design. With a sixth generation, even though it could be bigger, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have a larger radar cross section. Technology is advancing very quickly when it comes to things like additive manufacturing and when it comes to things like aircraft design. These things are advancing really, really rapidly. And especially for the sixth gen, we're going to be seeing a lot more different aircraft with a lot more different philosophies compared to previous generations of fighter jets to what they look like and how they act. And in some cases, maybe some of them aren't as stealthy. Maybe. Who knows? That's still up to the air on what happens there. But if they wanted to make a fiction, if you want to make a fifth generation as, I guess, stealthy as a fifth generation aircraft, it's more than possible to do that in the modern context.
Well, it'll just be bigger.
It'll be maybe big boys. Big boys. They need
chunky.
Well, especially for some of them. Some of them, quite a few of them, like decap, are focused on like long range. They're designed from the offset to have extremely large range, which helps with their size. And again, there's of course the power aspect. If you can only put so much power into an aircraft. You're limited by the fuselage design for what you can put in the aircraft. So of course, bigger aircraft are needed to pump more power into it, to put more systems inside of it. It's one of those like natural evolutions. I'm not like a big fan of things getting bigger. Across the fence and in the military context, things tend to naturally get bigger over time. I'm not the biggest fan of it because then you get into ridiculous territory sometimes these days.
The square cube law rests for no man.
No. like we have the 10, General Dynamics has a 10 by 10 version of the lab, which is technically Piranha based, not exactly lab based, but still. And like when I see something like that, I'm just trying to like wrap my head on why it needs to exist. And of course, I've like talked to them, and they're like, "Well, you can like do like bridge laying and like towing." It's like that's great and all, but like this is a monstrosity that shouldn't exist. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you're just getting too big, and you're getting too comfortable. You need to get like knocked down a peg and like told to stop it.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, well, that is interesting. I guess our final question before we go into our break then, Noah. Do you think that Canada should stick with the sole replacement fleet of F-35s, or do you think we should be adding any other equipment for a mixed fleet?
I think that for Canada, the best course of action, and I've said this since the beginning of this very, very weird and very, very dislikable review. No offense to everybody. I don't like the current fighter review. I think it's been handled very, very spectacularly bad.
You think we would have
And
been better off just getting the F-35 a decade ago and already having them?
my idea is stick to the F-35, focus on the sixth generation, look for partners in Europe, look for partners around that would be willing to allow us into a sixth generation program and focus on the because it's like
So the F-35 will be like our bridge while we look to Europe or to Asia or Africa for other partners that we can build a sixth generation fighter with.
Basically, if you're that concerned about the F-35, use it as a bridge because these systems are going to be coming online in the next decade, 15 years anyways. And you got to ask yourself, do you want to stick with a fourth generation aircraft? And of course, you could make the argument, well, it's cheaper to operate and we can operate more. And, that's wonderful, but that gets into government policy on if the government would even be okay with that and whether they're okay with funding that. A lot of conversations tend to point to, well, we could get a larger number, but at the same time, it's like, well, that's not really up to, say, the Air Force.
And if jets are all going to get bombed out in the first day of a war, fourth generation jets are really going to get bombed out in the first day of the war.
You're in any conflict with the United States, you're screwed no matter what. But hey, at least you can try and maybe get a couple shots in before you're vaporized into a fine mist at the very least.
Well, that's a fun note. Anyway, folks.
I don't mean to sound doom and gloom about it, but
no, it's valid. Folks, don't go anywhere. This is the end of our first half, but we'll be back soon with our guest, Noah Gairn, the writer of the True North Strategic Review and a defense analyst, to talk about our 3 headline topics of the week. Today's episode of It's Getting Pretty Late with Jake Landau is brought to you by me. Folks, all of my work is available for free with no paywall at jakelandau.ca. But in order to keep writing and recording, I need money, because money is what makes this show go round. So, if you enjoy my content or find it informative, please consider a paid subscription at jakelandau.ca/subscribe. And please leave a 5-star rating on the show in your favorite podcast app, be it Apple, Spotify, or a secret third thing. Thank you, and enjoy the show. And we are back from the break with our guest Noah Gairn from the True North Strategic Review, a defense analyst, and our 3 headline topics of the week. Our first headline topic from CBC News from reporter Kevin Myman. IDF soldiers are doing speaking events in Canada. Some say they shouldn't be here. Calls to investigate Israeli soldiers grow after 6 protesters charged at Toronto event. Now, for those who aren't fully aware, the main thrust of things here is that for a campaign called Students Supporting Israel, Israeli soldiers are coming to Toronto Metropolitan University in Toronto and other universities across the country as part of a wider tour where they're talking about their military service, specifically their service in Gaza during the current war. And obviously, there are many people who are unhappy with that on the very simple basis that we consider Israel's actions in Gaza a genocide and the soldiers who perpetuate them to be war criminals. Nonetheless, it's a discussion. It's a controversy. Obviously, there are people who don't agree with me. There are people who think what Israel's doing is good, or that even if you disagree with it, they should still be free to come and talk to students. What mainly really gets me here, Noah, is going aside from things like international law and our international obligations, is it necessarily appropriate for the soldiers of foreign militaries to come and talk to students, either secondary or post-secondary, and essentially try and say, here's what military service is like, here's what it would be like for... It's essentially a recruitment campaign, and I feel comfortable saying that because as a Jewish Canadian, I had IDF soldiers come when I was a kid to do these kind of recruitment campaigns, and it was very much from the perspective of you should come and join the IDF too. So, what's your perspective as a defense analyst on like how much leeway should Canada have for members of foreign militaries coming here for something that isn't like a direct collaboration with the Canadian military, like as part of allied operations?
I'm not the biggest fan of those kinds of things, and of course, I am not a big fan of having IDF soldiers coming over and speaking to young children outside of the context of the Canada-Israeli relationship.
Yeah, I mean
Never.
when I was in school at my private Jewish day school as a kid before I went to a public high school, we had at least one gym class where two teenagers from Israel, they're called shlichim, where the program is they come over to delay their military service for a year, and then they come talk to like Jewish youth groups at schools and synagogues about how excited they are to go into the military. And in one gym class, they had us doing like fake drills, military drills, like so like they're
What's going on in Jewish private?
no, yeah, like so you go. I agree with you that there's a little bit of suspect stuff going on here.
I wouldn't. No matter what the country is, I'm not like really saying. I'm not like really going to be support. Like,
Yeah, we're not picking on Israel
like, hey,
specifically here.
Legion,
Yeah,
but like
it's like I would feel just as
especially
uncomfortable if like an American was coming here to say join the U.S. military.
well, if the Israelis especially, there is that added context of what has happened in Gaza, what
Yeah,
have they potentially done in Gaza that is potentially against international law, and we do have to
we
consider
might be
that
a bit
in
beyond
discussion.
potentially, Noah.
We might, it's like on the individual level, it's one of those like
Right.
you yourself might not have done really anything that's technically against international law. However, in the context of what is going on, there does have to be a process of verification in my
Right.
mind. There does have to be a process of, what did you do? What happened?
I mean, there is also, though,
going
like a settled precedent in international law that if you willingly serve in a military that you are aware is committing war crimes, then you are yourself a war criminal. And that's been the precedent since Nuremberg. And I mean, I know Israel does have a draft, but so did Germany. And like
it gets really
yeah,
complex in the international law context because
if
like nobody
international law will ever be applied.
if ever international, yeah, let's not get into let's not get into the fun dynamics of who gets punished by international law.
Mainly, it consists of going on vacation to the wrong country and then finally being held responsible for your actions.
We'll get to we'll get to everybody eventually. The ICJ says to themselves as
they die first.
as they plot their next trip to country number A to go investigate. Surely this time they will prosecute somebody. But no, like if you're coming over here in my mind and you're trying to recruit for a foreign military, that does not sit right with me. That's something that I have stood by when it comes to other countries. There's also, if there's cooperation with the Canadian Armed Forces on doing programs like this, because they do happen from time to time, then that's a bit different. However, when it's an actual basically Israeli delegation coming and doing their own shtick of, hey, come to Israel, join the IDF, don't worry about anything. It's like, no, that's not comfortable to me. And again, I would be against it with no matter what country it is, but when it comes to Israel, especially where there's, on my personal end, a lot of concern,
Yeah,
especially with the IDF. Like no offense, but like I'll play it clearly straight. Like there's a reason nobody really likes working with the IDF.
yeah. Well, this is the thing. I've talked with former soldier, like veterans and even current soldiers in the Canadian forces. And whenever the topic comes to Israel, they're some of the most offended by Israel's conduct during the war, because they tell me if they conducted themselves that way in the Canadian military, they would have had their ass bounced to the deepest, darkest military prison imaginable. And listen, listen, they may be elite talking themselves up a bit too much. I am sure the Canadian military has also done objectionable and horrible things. But I also think it's important when there are like soldiers in Canada who are like, no, this is not an appropriate way for a Western military to conduct itself.
No.
Like, this is not okay. I do think we should listen to their learned experience, because if something calls out to them as immoral, then it might really be immoral.
The IDF has a bad reputation.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not.
I mean, we've all seen a
secret.
video of them literally like anally raping a prisoner, and now in Israel, the senior military official who exposed it is the one being prosecuted and not the people who raped the prisoner.
You can see any number of footage of, the one thing I just remember early in the conflict is, of course, watching Israeli soldiers just kind of blind spraying into apartment buildings. You see stuff like that, and that's the stuff that really gets to people.
Yeah.
Okay? It's one of those, like, it's so extremely unprofessional and goes against every like way of doing things that you kind of have to just sit back and wonder, like, what is going on. And like, the IDF again doesn't have a great reputation.
Yeah.
There's a reason why nobody really works with the IDF.
And in the CBC article, they report that Canadians who are serving in the IDF told the Times of Israel in July they're afraid to come back home for fear of arrest or retaliation. And I'm like, damn, maybe you shouldn't have gone to the place with war crime army where they commit war crimes. Like, if you're a Canadian, then that was fully a choice. You weren't even drafted. You just went there because you wanted to do this shit. Like, you don't expect me to feel sorry for you.
And like, it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, you have to take a step back and just like, you read that kind of stuff and you just kind of step back and be like, what was your actual logic and thinking? Of course, my father was, part of my father's family came from the West Bank, so I have a somewhat like historical tie to it. I don't really think about it much. I have thought about it in the context, of course, of, talking to other family members and whatnot who do have that context. And you do get into that kind of, how do I put it? You do get into that kind of place of, what is acceptable for Canada to do in this regard? What should Canada be doing? And are we doing enough on either side to really, stand up to the commitments that we've made? Like, we can
the answer would be no.
And say,
we are not doing enough.
Put out press releases. We can sit out and put statements. Obviously, I'm not going to be out there defending Hamas or anybody, God forbid. But, we do have to ask ourselves, what are we doing as a country to kind of, take an appropriate step into this? And of course, with Canada, it's never going to be us alone. It's always going to be an international effort.
We could, one, like, the big thing that always sticks out to me is we could have an actual arms embargo instead of lying that we're going to have one and then continuing to sell the weapons anyways. Because
you will never see a true arms embargo on Israel.
I know, but like and I think that's what makes people mad, because it's like, well, why? If we're all talking about how they're not a super big customer and how it wouldn't be noticeable, then why aren't we just getting rid of them as a customer?
They might not be a big customer to us, but we are a big customer of them.
It's just like, we can all see from the port of Tel Aviv, we can see the shipments coming from General Dynamics Canada. Like, you can only like sell so many mortar shells to the Israelis and then claim there's nothing to be done.
And the Israeli arms industry is inherently tied to the Western arms industry. Israel's obviously built a very large, very advanced military-industrial complex. In the context of Canada, we do use a lot of Israeli equipment, just like most other people in the West use a lot of Israeli military equipment. So, of course, whenever we hear about stuff like arms embargoes, my mindset's always thinking of I don't think you're ever going to do that in my context, because I don't see how you're going to jeopardize that relationship. Like, for
But people
example,
want us to jeopardize thrill. Not only jeopardize,
the
people like the majority of the Canadian public does not like Israel and wants us to tell them to fuck off.
and then of course we get into the thing of, and then of course from like a defense analyst standpoint, obviously from my kind of viewpoint of this, what we talk about, especially like Israeli equipment, is like it gets a bit complex because the Israelis do produce a lot of great equipment and we do use a lot of their equipment. However, again, like you, I do have some hesitations on trusting Israeli military industry and,
Do you think we
being
should start
active.
selling weapons to the Palestinians to be sporting? Like, if we're not going to stop selling weapons to Israel, the next best thing is we can also sell mortars to the Palestinians as well. We don't have to do Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but I'm sure there's like a left-wing socialist violent group we can pick. Like, the right kind of terrorist.
Palestinian Islamic Jihad and asking them like asking them if they want to buy some more.
Hey, Israel sold us some Galils, but we don't really want them. You want
yeah. A good chunk of our radar capability is Israeli. Our only anti-tank guided missile, which was technically procured not for the whole army, but for, of course, use in Latvia, is the Spike anti-tank guided missile. More specifically, the Spike LR2. So that's Israeli. One of the leading competitors for the phase 2.
What if we do like regime change?
Well, would the Israelis be up for regime change?
No, they're not getting a choice. We're changing their regime.
We're changing.
That's the regime I want to change. It's like if we
living out our Venezuelan fantasies.
If we can't cut off Israel, then can we just get them to stop making bad choices?
We don't ask for much. We just ask you to just maybe stop.
Can you let Palestinians vote, please, and thank you?
Please find the one moderate over here, please.
Please let the one moderate Palestinian leader out of his solitary confinement cell. Please stop sabotaging peace. Well, I'm sure continuing to sell them weapons won't go wrong. Moving on to our next topic of the week. On our second topic from the Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief at the Globe and Mail, Bill Curry, federal departments refusing to provide details on spending cuts, PBO says. The interim parliamentary budget officer, Jason Jacks, said the government told his office it will not meet his November 19th deadline. Now, here's the thing. The parliamentary budget officer has, under the law, a full power to compel compel is the exact word, to compel the government to provide information from each government department on what they will be cutting in the budget. Like this, it's basic budgetary information. The parliamentary budget officer, their entire job as it exists, is created by Parliament to supervise the government of the day, is to evaluate the details of the budget put forward so that all members of Parliament, government and opposition and crossbench, can all evaluate the budget with level-headed, sober eyes and see what exactly voting yes or no will mean for certain areas of the government. It is not an optional thing. The Parliament of Canada Act requires that when the parliamentary budget officer requests this government from the speakers of the House of Commons and the Senate, that it be provided. However, the speakers have said, nah, sorry, we can't do that right now. And the parliamentary budget officer is in a bit of a pickle because while he's apparently got the legal power to compel the government to do this, there's no legal penalty defined for if they don't comply, which kind of draws back on actually being able to compel them. Because sure, you can say that, the power of the law compels you, and then the person says, nonetheless, and I don't like this. I really don't like this. I know liberals are mad that the interim parliamentary budget officer for criticizing things they say. Nonetheless, that is exactly his job, to look at the numbers and then give his honest appraisal of the numbers. And if they don't like that, they should let someone else be the government.
I didn't even think their initial report was that bad. That's the funny thing about all this. I don't even think that what's been said so far was even really that bad in
Well,
the
as a
context.
former liberal, I can tell you pretty definitively that liberals really hate when someone offers fair and reasonable criticism. When it's stupid, they don't get mad. They laugh it off. But when someone criticizes a liberal in a fair and reasonable way, they're enraged because it makes them look not as smart as they think they are.
That's just a liberal. Like, there's a lot you can criticize the current government for when it comes to stuff like that. From especially because again, this year especially has been the year of defense. So obviously, I'm not going to criticize the budget spending on defense. Thank you, Prime Minister Carney, for giving me a bunch of content to talk about,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you, thank you for my from my wallet to you, sir. Thank you. But at the same time, defense has been such a big topic this year. Obviously, and of course, I talk about stuff other than defense. I talk about international relations and whatnot on the side of it. This current government, it doesn't surprise me when I hear stuff like that. One of the things I've been kind of flagging the last couple months is the lack of transparency in the current Carney government, more so than the Trudeau government. Quite a bit,
and
quite
it's
a
not
bit
like
more
Trudeau
so.
is that transparent.
And exactly, it's not like the Trudeau is that really that
It's just
transparent in
been
its
a
own regard.
downhill slide.
But now we're getting into the new Carney government. And obviously, as anyone who has seen the current history can tell, Mark Carney is very much a centralizer in that he likes to keep everything close to his chest.
He's a
likes
technocrat. He's not used to working in a system where there are other people who also have a mandate that he can't fire.
I often compare it almost to how Harper ran things back in the day, where a lot of power was centralized with him.
I wonder why Harper wanted Carney to be a conservative minister. Like, it boggles the mind.
If I can point two things on the defense side to kind of use as an example, I can point to, again, the fighter review, and I can also point to the Coast Guard move for two things that kind of have irked me about the transparency of the current government. With the Coast Guard move, it came out of nowhere. Not even the unions were properly informed about the move. It's been the idea of moving the Coast Guard D&D has always kind of existed since it was moved in the 90s to the DFO. But when it came to the current government, the move was sudden, it was swift. Of course, as part of my job, I obviously had to try and cover it to the best of my ability. Nobody knew what was going on. There was no idea of what anything was happening. Ministers were giving contradicting statements to what was happening and what was going to be the actual game plan. Even right now, the actual full details of the move have not been ironed out. It was essentially a choice by the Prime Minister's office to move the Coast Guard and to centralize a lot of that effort under the DND that was under the Prime Minister's office. And it was kind of a, well, we're going to move you and we're going to figure out the details after. We're going to work towards the details after, but we want to move you now. And that kind of stuff already flagged me. And then, of course, we got the fighter review. And for people who aren't in the defense space, I'm going to kind of throw out how it was for me when I saw the fighter review. So immediately after the election, Bill Blair, then Minister of National Defense, went on to CPC and he mentioned that there was going to be a fighter review completely out of the blue, completely no warning whatsoever. Just there's going to be a fighter review. We're going to review our options on the F-35. We want to see if there's any economic
after
benefit.
Trudeau already did a review.
After we've already did a review.
After Harper did the first procurement.
After multiple procurement processes and multiple resets
and the first time around, we wouldn't have been getting the normal F-35A. We would have been getting a special custom variant. So, the deal's been getting worse.
And, you get to, the fighter review, and it's in my time, it's okay, I know the fighter review, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. And the summer rolls around, and, of course, my thing was, okay, which department's running this review? And when I originally went, I was told, okay, well, it's the DND. And it's oh, okay, that's great. And it's well, no, it's actually ISET who's doing the review. And then it's, okay, no, Public Service of Canada is doing it. Oh, no, they're all doing it. And then it's like, well, Jolly is in Europe for the Paris Air Show. She's going to be talking to people. And I'm like, okay, that's good. We'll start the year stuff soon. Summer rolls out. We hear nothing. We don't know what the requirements of the review were. We don't know what was said. We only barely know who was met. We don't know what the goals were. We don't know what the process was for verification. Because, of course, if you're a company and the government comes to you and says, well, we want to, get a better deal on fighter jets. You want to talk about domestic manufacturing and whatnot. If you're a company like, say, I don't freaking know, Airbus or something, or one of the other Eurofighter companies. There's technically a Eurofighter consortium, and I'm sorry to all the people who are going to yell at me for that for saying Airbus. In a 5-month review, how do you really get together a proper package to present to the government? How does the government go about verifying it? And then you have ministers coming in, it's like, oh, well, we're going to.
And what is there going to be that there wasn't before?
And it's like, from my perspective, we have no details on the review. We still don't have any details on our review. We don't know what's been said. We don't know what the requirements were. We don't know what the process was. We have no idea what was even going on in it. We do know, I know at least who was talked to and who was met. We had a deadline set for the end of the summer. That deadline got thrown out. And of course, I personally believe that the deadline.
I mean, Noah, let's be fair here. I mean, the government. This is a lot of sensitive information that the government might not be able to trust the public with, and I mean, especially you. It's not like you're a defense analyst or anything.
And of course, there is
sarcasm tag for those who didn't get it.
There is certain select information that is vital to national security that you don't want to talk about.
Right.
That, of course, comes with my job. However, when you have a completely unknown review and you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar contract and a very, very big, important contract to the CAF, and we can get exactly zero on what the actual details of the review are, from my perspective, it becomes a very big transparency risk, because I'm always in the camp of, I understand when certain things can be talked about. That comes with my job. That's a major part of my job, is to understand what can be talked about and what can't be talked about. And you have to accept that there are certain things that you will never be able to get the information for, because, like, for example, we have the request for proposals for the Canadian Patrol Submarine Project that was released unannounced about 2 weeks ago. It was given to the company. We're never going to get that RFP because there's just too much sensitive information into it. That's fine. But when you have a review where ministers are contradicting David McGuinty, going and saying, well, it's the RCAF's choice.
And fundamentally, the military can't operate if they don't know the reasoning for orders. The job of the military, of course, is to follow the orders they're given, with it, as long as they're legal orders, of course. But it's like, you do have to, on occasion, you do have to explain to the people you're giving orders to, this is what our goal is. This is because the mission can change. Like, you can send troops out to do some sort of mission, and then they can get there and find out the information they were given is different than what's on the ground. And if you haven't explained why you gave them the orders, they can't change the plan to suit the new mission.
And like, for the RCAF, they're rolling on the ball of, we're going to get the full order, because that's the best that they can do right now. But those entire situations really irk me from a transparency side of things, because, like, of course, I'm caught in the middle of it. And you look at it and you can't help but feel this really, really, like, big sense of, like, worry and dread of, okay, if this is how you're treating this process, I'm now very concerned for how you're treating every other process. And it doesn't help build, especially with a new government who's trying to rebuild trust from the Trudeau era, from especially the late Trudeau era.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to rebuild public trust in your efforts, and you're trying to do all this nation building, and you're trying to do all this big, grandiose plans, if I'm looking at you and I can't trust you on my file, I can't trust you on anything.
Exactly, because
stuff like this,
everyone has that one section they know better than other fields, and that's where you really are able to test the government's bullshit, because you only know what you know, and when they're wrong on what you know, you ask about what they're saying that you don't know.
It makes it hard for me to sit back and look at this stuff and be like, okay, well, maybe there's a good reason, or okay, maybe I'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And it especially presents bad when we're in an era of course, trade difficulties. I'm going to use that lightly. Trade difficulties, the elegant term.
Yeah.
When we're in an era of that, we're in an era where we're like, okay, we need to start building. We want to start doing major projects. We're talking about all these different things on the table. And it's not something that I want to trust a government who isn't transparent with me about even basic information. It's not someone I want to trust on people who are trying to circumnavigate the system in a way that allows them to kind of keep everything overly centralized. And what would be the proper term? Jake, give me the proper term.
Not sure exactly which word you're looking
Well,
for.
folks, this is what happens when you deal with me for over an hour. I start
Yeah.
making up terms in my head.
No, I get what you mean. It's like there's a fundamental lack of transparency here, and I mean what's blatant is the Comptroller General told the PBO that they cannot provide the information at this time because Parliament had not yet had the chance to vote on it. To which PBO said, "No, that is not an allowed condition under the law. And in fact, I need the information to give to MPs before they vote on it." So it's like they're very blatantly trying to fuck around with things and mix order.
They're trying
and
to stretch it out past the vote. And it's like, and of course, I'm not expecting the current government to fall in any capacity. So, like,
but it is something that, like, in normal times, this is what would cause a minority government to collapse. Like, the problem is that all the opposition and crossbench parties have just no resources to run an election.
There's no resources, there's no will, and we're in a very unprecedented time.
But there should have been. There should be an election, in my opinion, because there is not a budget that a majority of parliament sincerely can agree on passing. And the people who did give their support to the Liberals to help pass it either don't like what's in there or don't know what will be in there.
Then I can agree on that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, at the same time, personally, I don't want to deal with another election just because I don't want to. But at the same time, you look at things and you're like,
if there isn't the fear of that, then they'll just get away with too much.
And of course, I get it from the NDP side of things. I know you're broke. I'm sorry.
But,
I'm sorry you're broke. I'm sorry you're broke. Don Davies but I mean, arguing on Twitter on how broke you are.
To mainly finish on that topic, the government should follow the law.
Yeah. It's very bad when we're less than a year into the government. We're just at the first budget. And already I do have some pretty big, because I was willing to give a bit of leeway. I'm going to be honest on that. I was willing to give
I think a lot of people were willing to give a bit of leeway at the start of things, but the honeymoon period is over.
The honeymoon period for me is especially over. And of course, I'm not going to criticize the budget fully because, like, I got what I wanted.
You like the defense spending commitments, but you need transparency.
Exactly. Just because I benefit a lot from there being a lot of the defense spending, both professionally and personally, does not mean that we want to live in a society where this kind of stuff doesn't get called out and this kind of stuff is allowed to freely continue. We've already dealt with it for years and years and years already. We're not at the stage where we want to keep doing it.
Cool. Alrighty, moving on to our final topic of the day, and this is our local story. In Toronto, from CTV News, from Laura Sebin, the Finch West LRT to open on December 7th. Yes, before Line 5 will open, because that still has an unknown opening date, Line 6 will be opening on December 7th in just 2 weeks. Which is pretty neat. I'm looking forward to it. At the same time, it's called Line 6, like it'll be the same as Lines 1, 2, and 4 are metro lines in Toronto. But it's not. It is a streetcar. It's a tram. It's a streetcar. And folks, when you get to ride it on December 7th, or if you're looking at the photo when you click on the link in the description of this podcast, you will see very plainly this is a streetcar. It is a tram operating on the street, stopping at red lights with traffic. Now, to be fair, it has a separate lane like the Spadina streetcar and the King streetcar, but it's still a streetcar. And I mean, also, it has crossover tracks instead of loops, so it can turn around a lot quicker, to be fair. But still, it's a streetcar. And from the reports people are providing, it may be just as slow or even slower than the buses that ran on Finch West beforehand, because it will be stopping at every single red light with no true signal priority. And for the amount of money that we spent to build a streetcar line. I think there is a lot of effort going in from the TTC's part so that people do not know until they start to ride it for the first time that it is just a streetcar line. So, Noah, for our no prize question of the week, do you think that this should be called Line 6 or should it be called the 536?
It absolutely should not be called Line 6 because
That is the correct answer.
it is not a proper.
Even line 5
I'm sorry,
will
it's
always
not a
go
proper
underground or be grade separated for some parts. You don't need to be underground to be a metro. Elevated rail is just as good as Chicago and Vancouver can tell you guys at home, but you need some sort of grade separation. Like trams, especially in Toronto, they're not good because no one on city council is willing to put them ahead of cars at the intersection lights, which means that they're just a long bus.
It is for the amount of money we're spending on things, especially to basically again get a glorified streetcar, especially considering the already outrageous price we pay for transit construction in Canada is absolutely freaking shameful.
I compare it like credit where credit's due to Doug Ford, I guess. The new Line 3, the Ontario line, will be a fully automated metro system. There won't be any human drivers, and it'll be fully grade separated, and it'll be exactly what I'm always saying new transit build should be, a automated metro that's fast and frequent. So to have the province doing stuff like that on one hand, but then from the previous liberal era of planning, we have like these overbuilt streetcar projects. It's frustrating.
We inherit streetcar projects that we now have to try and justify. No. It's absolutely an LRT. Look at this one feature. The other streetcars don't have that. It's very clearly an LRT.
If you're one of the students who goes to Humber College, then this direct link into Finch West Station on Line 1 will be pretty useful, as hopefully there will be the Line 5 extension westward as well, more than the extension that's under construction right now that would also link it up to Humber. But this will be useful for people. It'll create a lot of connections, but it's frustrating how low capacity it is going to be. It is going to open and it will already be full. It will not be a serious upgrade over the bus, in my opinion.
And that's always the goal of this higher end of transit. You want to try and get, again, above where buses are and above where something like BRT could provide. And we're at a stage now where we're inheriting these billion-dollar projects that
would it have
really
not been a lot cheaper to just have it be a BRT with articulated buses in their own dedicated lane?
BRT. Yeah. See, I'm one of the people who likes BRT.
I'm mixed on. I think in a lot of cases, if you have enough of a population, you should be going right to building a metro line. But there are a lot of cases where I think a BRT could make sense. And I think especially if you're going to build a normal streetcar, but you're not going to get rid of proper road traffic. If you, when you go to Europe, you'll see their streetcars and trams tend to blend into pedestrianized areas. You aren't exiting into vehicle traffic like you do on Toronto streetcars, because that would be silly. That's dangerous. They're a more integrated part of communities, and we just don't have that kind of urban planning in Toronto.
And higher end transit is also a very great economic development tool. Something that often people in these discussions don't really bring up, especially if we're talking at the local level, is the economic development that higher end transits like LRT are supposed to provide. Of course, I like to use Kitchener-Waterloo as an example of this over other places of where that can have a very big economic benefit. But at the end of the day, it's supposed to have these big economic benefits. But when you inherently restrict your higher end transit with things like stopping at red lights, not only do you have the people disadvantage, but again, you do lose quite a bit of that economic advantage you would have had if you had went for the higher end of transit. And of course, you can't judge transit specifically on the financials. That's why we have stuff like
part of that economic advantage is being able to develop above transit.
It
like the
is.
air rights, it's being able to not just have a stop or a station, but have a stop or station integrated into something people in the community will use, because it creates a reason for people to go in and out of there.
One thing I'll criticize the wonderful city of Hamilton for in that regard is not having good planning when it comes to their own trammy LRT
Such
in
as the
that
auto
regard.
worker lifestyle. Like, if you're, I find that cities that are based on the auto industry tend to have notoriously shitty public transit. Like, it's true for
Windsor.
Windsor, it's true for London, it's true for Hamilton, and true for Detroit and America just across.
Well,
But
before I moved to the middle of nowhere, I'm originally from Hamilton. I'm from the area where the LRT is, and I'm like looking at, and of course, I still have a lot of friends in Hamilton. So it's like you ask about it, and you're like, okay, what's going on? And you like, I left Hamilton probably, oh gosh, like 7 or 8 years ago, and the amount of undevelopment that's happened there, where nothing has gotten done, is absolutely ridiculous. When you're playing, in my mind, if you're playing an LRT, you need to have that higher end development
yeah,
tied into it. You need to have
if you're
it
planning
built
any
right in from the
transit,
start.
it needs to go somewhere. You can't have stops to nowhere.
You can't have stops in random ass rural or freaking random ass just suburban areas. No matter how much
You can't
some
do
people
what the
might like it.
TTC did on the Shepherd subway with Bessarion Station, where it literally wasn't until a couple years ago where buildings finally went up, and for 20 years it was like literally a flat field with tumbleweeds outside the station.
You really can, but like that, but like local, especially citywide governments are just so bad. Especially again here in Ontario, are just so bad in that regard. It happens everywhere. Like I'm not going to defend any other province and say like they're doing wonderfully better, except my beautiful Vancouver, who I love.
Oh yeah,
I love
Vancouver
this.
Transit is
I
doing
love the
great.
sky.
Yeah.
I love the sky train. I'm
Well,
very
exactly. You get
and
what I mean. It's like the SkyTrain. It's like no one would rather have a streetcar over the Vancouver SkyTrain, except
the
for
sky train's
Jennifer
awesome.
Keysmat, who I will never stop mocking for saying that elevated rail destroys communities. And I'm like, Vancouver and Chicago would like to have a word with you.
Elevated rail only destroys communities when you use it to isolate and divide communities, which I guess goes to a lot of saying when people bring it up themselves, and you gotta wonder, what are you thinking of?
No, yeah.
This is gonna look like you can know you can kind of suss out people that way. Of course, I'm in Sudbury, so I don't have really much transit here,
Simply build
sadly.
it to serve the community, and the community will grow. Like,
Exactly.
one neat trick urban planners hate when you point it out.
And
Uh,
of course, like we're going, I'm not going to credit. And of course, I will give like Doug Ford a bit of credit for keeping a bunch of transit projects funded still and trying to get things over. Like I'll give credit where
oh,
credit's
yeah.
due.
Like, I
Of
have a
course,
lot of things to yell at Doug Ford about, but building metro lines in my city is not one of them. He's
I
building the
wish
relief line when the left would not, and he will get credit for that, for better or for
I
worse.
wish we did more.
Yeah.
He's still doing better than the previous liberals. I wish we did
I
more.
wish instead of any highway bullshit, he was doing double the public transit.
And of course, I'm not going to defend Metrolinx.
Yeah.
That's like no one's
Eh,
ever going to defend
sometimes
Metrolinx as a good
sometimes I can
organization.
be happy with Metrolinx. They do a lot of smaller improvements that have added up over time. Like, they've been slowly and gradually buying up track corridor and doing slight improvements. Like, if you're in Niagara region, then you have double the GO trains you did a few months ago because of what Metrolinx has done.
We need to get we have to get the rest of the Kitchener line out of freaking CN's hands.
Amen to that.
Yeah, before it like degrades into fine powder.
Yeah. But
I will not be happy with any of the rail company. I have a notorious hatred of CN and CP. That is my thing.
don't we
So
all?
like I would no, who does love them?
Yeah.
Nobody.
Well,
We all hate them.
I guess on a closing note, best of luck to the Finch streetcar on its opening soon. I will be there to ride it, and then write a snarky column telling everyone, told you so. Noah,
Go
thank you
wee when
so
you go
much for joining
underground.
the program this week. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show to talk about defense and other topics. This is Noah Gairn. He writes for the True North Strategic Review. He's a defense analyst. And Noah, thank you again for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Jake. I always love these conversations. Part of my job is obviously to educate the population. That is the mandate that the True North Strategic Review has. We are an educational source. And the more that we can get out there and educate people on defense, the benefits of defense investment, as well as what's going on in the defense community, it is better in my book. So thank you for taking time to have me, especially because I know your podcast is not defense focused. Thank you, especially for having the
We're
time
politics
to
focused, and right now, like, Canadian defense is a very salient topic of the day. But no, thank you again, Noah. It really has been great. Noah Gairn, everybody. And that'll do it for this week's episode. Thanks once again to Noah Gairn for joining the program. You can read his stuff on the True North Strategic Review. He does defense analyst work. And next week we will be back with another guest, so make sure to tune back in on your podcast feed, and we will see you then, folks. Have a great rest of your evening. This is the end of the show. Bye.